Here's a big scoop. There was more to the TikTok ban than meets the eye, and has a lot more to do with a country that is actually not China.
That's what journalist Ken Klippenstein wrote about in his latest Substack. It began when Ken caught wind of a panel at the Munich Security Conference with Democratic Senator Mark Warner and former Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher, who is now a Palantir executive. Let's watch.
Mike, how did that legislation pass so quickly? If this is correct and there's not a lot of people that understand, somebody understood something.
I want to see if you're going to tell the real story.
Okay, well, first of all, let the record
We're talking
reflect.
about the TikTok legislation.
Gallagher and Warner first introduced the bill in Congress that claimed that TikTok was a national security threat, a claim still relevant given the app's uncertain future.
With us now to reveal what that real story is, none other than Ken Klippenstein. Thank you for joining us, Ken.
Hey guys, good to be with you again.
And to do the spoiler, it was actually Israel rather than China that the argument that you make is that that is what revived the TikTok ban, the perception by more pro-Israel voices that anti-Israel narratives are proliferating on TikTok. That gave rise to a ability to actually get it enacted, correct?
That's right. In the past, there had been a lot of suspicion about this, and people pointed to, for example, a comment by Senator Mitt Romney, who essentially said, you know, there's too much anti-Israel content floating around on TikTok. We've got to do something about that. I thought that was possible, but what we have in this Munich Security Conference video was the actual sponsor, the individual in the House most responsible for not just introducing the legislation, but getting it across the finish line, himself saying that the legislation had been kind of moribund, had been just sitting there without very much support for, I think, 2 years prior to this. And then he explicitly identifies October 7th, the Hamas attack on Israel, as having brought it back to life and putting them in a position where they're actually able to pass it. And sitting next to him, you guys mentioned Senator Mark Warner. He was the chair. He was then the chair of the Intelligence Committee, now the top Democrat ranking member on the Intelligence Committee, would have been privy to all kinds of details about the classified briefings that were provided to Congress, which over the course of their discussion, they identified as being kind of the last thing that ended up succeeding at getting the votes that they were not able to get before.
And in relation to the broader picture, Ken, I mean, one of the things that I found fascinating about your reporting is it really gets to two separate but obviously related issues. One is freedom of speech and TikTok and whether it should be banned, sold, or none of those things. But the other thing is the actual argument about Israel and its policies and Gaza and all the rest of it. And this idea, particularly from either pro-Israel voices here in the US or the Israeli government itself, that, well, it's not the policy that's the problem, it's not having killed 47,000 people that's the problem, it's the algorithm. And you noted in your reporting that there was basically an exchange along those lines, not at that conference, but separately, where I believe an official in the Israeli Foreign Ministry was basically asked, about Israel losing credibility because of his policies, and his argument was, well, it's just the TikTok algorithm, that's the problem, right?
Yeah, as was described to me by a source in the State Department, who also provided me with a memo that shed light on these discussions with the Israeli government. The Biden administration was actually privately warning them of how damaging the conduct in the war in Gaza was for their image, not just in the United States, but internationally. And what was interesting to see from that memo was it's described that I think it was the deputy minister of the foreign ministry in Israel. It was just in total denial about it. He says, no, it has nothing to do with what we're doing. This is just the TikTok algorithm. And so what was interesting in the course of reporting on this story and talking to people at State who were familiar with their interactions with Israel was the extent to which this was actually hurting them, this delusion that there is nothing policy-wise that they can do to improve their image, and instead just blame it all on the social platform, which even if you assume, and I don't think there's any evidence for this, but you assume that the algorithm did play some kind of dastardly role in pushing out this kind of content, to say that that is the majority reason that internationally there's the outcry that we saw, it was just detached from reality. And that is exactly the sense that privately the State Department had, even if publicly they weren't saying these things. So in an ironic way, it actually ends up hurting Israel because it allows them to think that, everything's fine as long as we get this app under control, then our international standing will be fixed. When the reality is that the problem is much more endemic to the specifics of the war than any sort of social platform.
Right, because even even if the algorithm was tweaked to promote more of this content, it was just showing people more of content that was real, right? Like I'm trying not to be under any illusions. I think it is plausible, although often asserted without tremendous evidence, that China or the Chinese government could interfere in TikTok in ways to promote more content or suppress other content. We know that our own government has tried to do that to content on social media. So it would not surprise me at all to learn that a more repressive government than our own also seeks or uses that power. But that said, it was just you getting more of this information that is actually true information about what's happening there in the Middle East.
Well, it's insulting to the public that they think, oh, these are not actually your thoughts. You had them implanted in your head by some, malevolent force overseas. It's like, no, I know a lot of people, you might disagree with what they say, what their positions are, but these are sincerely held views in large part. And I can tell you that not just anecdotally, but just look at the people being interviewed. They're not being paid by think tanks. Again, you can disagree or agree with whatever it is that they're saying, but to impugn not just the sincerity, but their ability to even hold their own belief, it gives you a sense of the contempt that these members of Congress, or in the case of Gallagher, former member of Congress, hold for the general public. At one point during the discussion, he mentions a case of getting a flood of instances of suicide threats when they proposed legislation that could ban TikTok, and he pointed to that as, this is just proof of this malign foreign operation. And I'm sitting here thinking, you don't think that maybe people are just really, that's a part of their life? Like, it's not possible that this is just a sincerely held concern by people, that it's like, I spend a lot of time interacting with others, and it's like they assume everything is some kind of plot, and it's just crazy.
And let's talk about what this means for the broader context of the TikTok ban, because this is something that went before the Supreme Court, that you had the government defending, saying, this is actually about data privacy, and we have secret information that we can't tell you about how dangerous it is to allow TikTok to operate. And the Supreme Court, with some level of mixed feelings expressed by the justices in support of it, Gorsuch in particular saying, I'm kind of uncomfortable with this. We have a very short amount of time to decide this, but okay, I guess it can be banned because it's about data security rather than speech suppression. And that was the justification. Now we're finding out, now that people supported it, the members of Congress who proposed it, admitting that it was actually about responding to too much speech that was critical of Israel. That's a totally different thing. That gives away the game.
Exactly. And I was shocked to see the candor that they had. You watched the video at the beginning of the segment. They're grinning and laughing about this like it's some inside joke. They're like, are you going to tell the real story? It's like, hold on. You're an elected member of government, and in Gallagher's case, a former elected member of government, and you haven't told the public the real story, and you're going to brag about it in front of a camera? Again, the contempt is beyond belief. They're not even hiding it.
Talking of that, Ken, I just want to get back to something that you mentioned in passing, which was Mitt Romney's comments about this back last May, because I think the word choice here was really revealing. Romney was asked about it, and the thing that he cited as a problem on TikTok was, and I'm quoting directly here, the number of mentions of Palestinians relative to other social media networks. So the mention of Palestinians or the Palestinian cause was in itself considered a pretext for banning a social media. It's wild stuff.
Yeah, one of the difficulties in reporting on this is we don't know how to counter what was said in the classified briefing because we don't know what was in the classified briefing. We get a couple of Congress people who have the integrity, like Representative Sarah Jacobs of California, who came out and said, look, the contents of the briefing, she can't speak to the specifics because there are, legal sanctions if you disclose something that's classified. But she says in general terms, everything that was expressed in the briefing is true of all social media platforms. There was nothing unique to TikTok. And so clearly, at least some people considered the briefing not particularly compelling. But again, we don't even know the public has to fight with its hands tied behind its back, because if you're someone who doesn't want TikTok to be banned, you don't even know what to respond to because you don't know what was said. And these members of Congress, there are a couple of them that gave you a sense of what it was, but most of them say nothing about it. So it's like this really unfair system. You mentioned Robbie SCOTUS talking about this information that you can't know. And it makes you wonder when Romney comes out and says there's more posts, are they just looking at the quantity and concluding from that, jumping to the conclusion that, oh, it must have been some sort of malign algorithmic move to push this? Maybe there's just more posts about Israel and it's just organic. I mean, I spend a lot of time on social media. They're just organic trends. And if you look at it a certain way, you could say, wow, this is really viral. Someone must be behind it. But in reality, humans are social beings. We kind of respond to each other and jump on trends and things. So, I'm really concerned that the intelligence community, when they're doing these briefings, either that they're overstating what it is that they have, or maybe that these frankly really old members of Congress don't understand how social media works and they themselves are jumping to conclusions.
Yes, that comes through time and time again whenever we have hearings and we actually listen to the members of Congress, the senators, discussing important issues with tech CEOs, and they're completely clueless. It's like trying to talk to your grandparents or great-grandparents about, smartphone apps. Really fascinating reporting. I'm sure we will continue to follow this. The TikTok ban obviously has been on hold because President Trump now has a different view of it. I wonder if this will, perhaps you have, very quickly before we wrap, thoughts on whether this will affect the debate over whether to actually implement the TikTok ban in when the window closes.
Well, as we saw with the legislation, they almost didn't pass it, and they kind of lucked out in getting October 7th happening and being able to point to that, because obviously Israel's a very contentious and sensitive issue within Congress. So, the extent to which that recedes from the public's awareness, I think that the political environment could completely change. If you look at polling on this, it's extremely unpopular. At first, I paid close attention to the polling on this. At first, when this was just a proposed legislation, it was kind of split. It was maybe 50-50, maybe in some cases even 60-40 in favor, kind of along age lines, older people supporting the ban, younger people obviously opposing it. As you got closer to the actual passage of the thing, it became extremely unpopular. We're talking 70% opposition to it. And we know that it's unpopular because the Democrats panicked, and you had Senator Schumer getting out in front of this saying, oh, actually, we never supported the ban. We just wanted to divest. And then Biden himself, I think, ended up delaying the ban and forcing the Trump administration to decide what to do on their first day in office. So they're clearly under a lot of political heat, as they should be for this kind of a decision. So I think it's completely within the realm of possibility that the public attitude has just shifted and they won't be able to get away with it anymore.
Ken, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Up next, Kendrick Lamar found support for his halftime show from an unlikely place. We'll discuss.